The rhythmic clacking of train wheels cuts through the bitter November cold of 1944. Through frost-covered windows, Wehrmacht Obergefreiter Hans Müller watches endless rows of Iowa corn stubble disappear into gray horizons. His left shoulder throbs where American shrapnel tore through muscle and bone 3 weeks ago on the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy. Around him in the cramped prisoner car, 37 German soldiers sit in sullen silence. Some clutch bandaged arms. Others lean against the walls, faces pale with fever. The acrid smell of infected wounds mingles with unwashed bodies and fear. Muller touches his own wound. The makeshift bandage, torn from a dead comrade's shirt, has turned brown with dried blood and pus. "Scheisse, look at all this farmland," whispers Gefreiter Klaus Weber, barely 18, his right leg wrapped in dirty gauze. "How can they claim to be starving when they have so much?" Muller nods grimly. The propaganda back home painted America as a nation on the verge of collapse. Factories shuttered, hospitals empty, people fighting over scraps. Yet through these train windows, he sees barns bursting with grain, fat cattle dotting frozen pastures, roads lined with automobiles that would be luxury items in the Reich. An American guard unlocks the car door as the train shudders to a halt. "Camp Algona," he shouts in broken German. "Alle aussteigen." The prisoners stumble onto the platform, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Muller expects to see the ramshackle prison he'd been warned about. Rotting barracks, cruel guards, maybe a dirt-floored sick bay with a single overworked medic. Instead, he stares at rows of well-constructed buildings behind neat wire fencing. Electric lights illuminate clean pathways. American soldiers stand at attention, their uniforms pressed, their weapons maintained. But it's Weber's sudden collapse that changes everything. The young soldier crumples to the frozen ground, his infected leg unable to support his weight any longer. In Wehrmacht field hospitals, Muller had watched men like Weber die slowly, their wounds turning black as doctors rationed morphine and reused blood-soaked bandages. He'd seen field medics perform amputations with rusty saws, heard the screams of soldiers operated on without anesthesia because supplies had run dry. As American medics rush forward with a stretcher, Muller braces himself for the inevitable. Weber will be left to suffer, perhaps given minimal treatment if the Americans feel generous. After all, why waste precious medical supplies on enemy prisoners? The Nazi propaganda minister's words echo in Muller's memory. The decadent Americans lack the discipline for modern war. Their hospitals are understaffed, their medicine primitive, their resolve weak. What these German prisoners are about to discover in the next few hours will shatter every assumption they've carried about American strength, American values, and the very nature of the war they've been fighting. But first, they must walk through the gates of Camp Algona and into a medical reality that will leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about their enemy. Inside the camp's processing building, Muller strips off his torn uniform under the watchful eyes of American guards. The contrast hits him immediately. These Americans are well-fed, clean-shaven, their equipment pristine. Not like the gaunt, desperate soldiers he'd faced in the final days before capture, but men who radiated the confidence of overwhelming supply. Name, rank, unit. The American officer speaks fluent German, his clipboard thick with forms. Everything is documented, organized, systematic. Muller remembers the chaos of Wehrmacht field headquarters in those final weeks, missing supplies, lost communications, officers making decisions with outdated maps and empty medicine chests. Through the window, he watches Weber being loaded into what appears to be an ambulance. A real ambulance, not a converted truck or horse cart like the Wehrmacht used when fuel ran short. The vehicle's red cross gleams under electric floodlights that turn night into day across the entire compound. Mein Gott, whispers Unteroffizier Friedrich Kohler, a veteran of the Eastern Front. Look at the waste of electricity. Back home, they're rationing candles. Kohler would know about rationing. He'd served in Army Group Center during the retreat from Moscow, where field hospitals operated by candlelight when they operated at all. Muller had heard the stories. Surgeons amputating limbs with kitchen knives, morphine so scarce that men bit through leather straps during operations, penicillin as mythical as unicorns. The American processing continues with methodical efficiency. Each prisoner receives a medical examination, not the cursory glance Wehrmacht recruits got in 1943, but a thorough check by a doctor who actually has time to examine wounds, take temperatures, assess conditions. When the medic reaches Muller's infected shoulder, he frowns and makes notes. "This needs immediate attention," the doctor says in careful German. "We'll get you to the hospital right away." The word hangs in the air like an impossible promise. Muller's mind flashes to his last glimpse of a German field hospital outside Caen, a bombed church where wounded soldiers lay on straw pallets, their bandages unchanged for days. The single overworked doctor had run out of sulfa powder, performing surgery with instruments sterilized in whatever alcohol could be found. Men died not from their wounds, but from infections that spread like wildfire through the overcrowded space. The propaganda they'd been fed painted a different picture of American medical care. Racial weakness, they were told, inferior organization, a society so focused on profit that it couldn't properly care for its own people, let alone enemy prisoners. The Americans will patch you up just enough to keep you alive for questioning, Kohler had predicted during their train journey. Then you'll rot in whatever hole they throw us into. But as they're escorted across the compound, Muller sees something that makes his step falter. Through the lit windows of a long white building marked with red crosses, he glimpses row after row of clean hospital beds. Not straw mattresses or wooden planks, but actual beds with white sheets, arranged in perfect lines that seem to stretch beyond what the eye can count. The building itself defies every expectation. It's larger than most Wehrmacht field hospitals, constructed of solid materials rather than canvas and scrap wood. Warm light spills from every window. Steam rises from what must be heating systems that actually work, unlike the freezing aid stations where German wounded shivered through operations. Unmöglich, Kohler breathes. Impossible. How can they afford such facilities for prisoners? It's a question that gnaws at Muller as they approach the hospital entrance. The Reich had always claimed superiority in organization, in military medicine, in the discipline needed for modern warfare. Yet here stands evidence of American abundance that dwarfs anything he'd seen in 3 years of Wehrmacht service. The doors swing open, releasing a wave of warm, antiseptic-scented air. Not the smell of decay and infection that haunted German field hospitals, but the clean odor of proper medical facilities. Inside, American nurses move between beds with unhurried competence, their uniforms spotless, their equipment gleaming. Muller's shoulder wound throbs as a nurse approaches with a wheelchair, an actual wheelchair, not the makeshift stretchers Wehrmacht medics cobbled together from rifle stocks and tent canvas. She speaks gently in English, her manner professional but kind. No hostility, no contempt, just the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to unlimited resources. As they wheel him deeper into the ward, Muller counts beds. 20, 30, 40. The rows continue beyond his sight, each bed equipped with clean sheets, real pillows, blankets that aren't threadbare or blood-stained. Beside many beds stand small tables holding what appear to be medicine bottles, not the carefully rationed vials he'd seen Wehrmacht doctors guard like precious stones, but multiple containers suggesting abundance beyond comprehension. The realization begins to sink in. If this is how Americans treat their prisoners, What must their frontline medical care be like? What does this say about the industrial capacity of a nation that can afford such facilities for enemies? A German prisoner in the next bed catches Muller's eye. The man's arm is in a proper cast, his color healthy, his eyes clear. He looks better than most Wehrmacht soldiers Muller had seen before capture. "How long have you been here?" Muller asks quietly. 2 weeks, the man replies. "They gave me something called penicillin. The infection cleared up in 3 days. 3 days! Back home, men die from wounds like mine." Penicillin. Muller had heard rumors of the miracle drug, whispered stories from captured Allied medics, but Wehrmacht doctors dismissed such talk as propaganda. If such medicine existed, surely the superior German war machine would have it first. Yet here, in this impossible American hospital, enemy prisoners received treatments German soldiers could only dream of. The American doctor approaches Muller's bed with an unhurried confidence that seems almost insulting. Dr. James Morrison, his nameplate reads, and he carries a clipboard thick with charts, a stethoscope draped casually around his neck. Behind him, a nurse wheels a cart loaded with supplies that would stock an entire Wehrmacht field hospital for weeks. "Let's take a look at that shoulder," Morrison says, in accented but clear German, already pulling on surgical gloves. Real surgical gloves, not the cloth strips Muller had watched Wehrmacht medics wash and reuse until they fell apart. As Morrison unwraps Muller's makeshift bandage, the German prisoner braces for the sharp intake of breath, the grim shake of the head that preceded amputation orders in Wehrmacht hospitals. Instead, the American doctor simply nods, making notes as he examines the infected wound with professional detachment. "Nasty infection, but nothing we can't handle," Morrison murmurs, reaching for a bottle from the supply cart. "We'll clean this up, give you some penicillin, and you'll be good as new in a week or two." The word hits Muller like artillery fire. He watches in stunned silence as Morrison draws clear liquid into a syringe. Not the precious, carefully measured drops Wehrmacht doctors dispensed like liquid gold, but a full dose administered without hesitation. The needle slides into Muller's arm with practiced ease, delivering what German propaganda had insisted was either American lies or supplies so limited they barely existed. "Unmöglich," Muller whispers, echoing Kohler's earlier disbelief. But the impossibility continues. Morrison cleans the wound with antiseptic that flows freely from seemingly endless bottles. He applies fresh bandages, clean, white gauze that appears to have been manufactured specifically for this purpose, not torn from uniforms or bed sheets. The supplies keep coming. Surgical tape, antibiotic ointment, sterile cotton swabs. 3 beds over, Muller watches an American nurse inject morphine into a German prisoner writhing with pain from shrapnel wounds. Real morphine, administered generously, not the watered-down doses Wehrmacht medics stretched to last impossible lengths. The prisoner's agonized moans fade to peaceful breathing within minutes. "How?" Muller finally asks Morrison. "How do you have so much?" The American doctor pauses, considering the question with genuine thoughtfulness. "We make it," he says, simply. "Our factories produce more medical supplies than we can use. Better to heal than to let men suffer, don't you think?" The casual nature of the response devastates Muller more than cruelty ever could. This abundance isn't special wartime production or propaganda for prisoner morale. It's simply how American medicine operates. While Wehrmacht doctors performed surgery by candlelight and rationed aspirin tablets, their enemies mass-produced miracle drugs and distributed them freely. Across the ward, Kohler lies in his own bed, staring at the ceiling in what appears to be shock. A cast encases his fractured leg, not the crude splints Muller had seen in German aid stations, but a professional medical cast that required specialized materials and training. The bed itself would be luxury accommodations compared to Wehrmacht field hospitals. Real mattresses, clean sheets changed daily, pillows that aren't stuffed with straw or newspaper. "I don't understand," Kohler calls weakly to Muller. "The propaganda, they told us America was falling apart, weak, disorganized. How can they afford all this for prisoners?" An answer comes from an unexpected source. Wilhelm Herzog, a Waffen-SS officer captured at Falaise, sits up in the bed between them. His uniform had marked him as elite, a true believer in Reich superiority. Now he speaks with the hollow voice of shattered faith. "I've been here 3 weeks," Herzog says quietly. "They've given me dental work. Dental work. Do you understand? I had a tooth infection that was spreading to my jaw. In any Wehrmacht hospital, they would have pulled the tooth with pliers and sent me back to duty. Here, they performed a root canal procedure. They saved the tooth." The ward falls silent, except for the quiet efficiency of American medical staff making their rounds. Nurses check temperatures, adjust IV drips, dispense medications with the casual abundance of a nation whose supply lines stretch back to untouched factories producing around the clock. Muller's infected shoulder already feels different. Not the throbbing agony he'd endured for weeks, but a clean, manageable pain as penicillin begins its work. He'd watched Wehrmacht soldiers die from infections half as severe, their bodies slowly consumed by gangrene as doctors rationed precious sulfa powder grain by grain. The psychological impact deepens as Muller observes the systematic care around him. American medics don't rush between patients like overwhelmed Wehrmacht doctors juggling impossible caseloads. They have time to examine, time to explain treatments, time to ensure proper healing. The luxury of abundance written into every interaction. A young German prisoner in the corner bed begins weeping. Not from pain, but from the crushing realization of what this abundance represents. "My brother died at Stalingrad from a wound smaller than yours," he tells Muller. "Bled to death because they had no supplies left to treat him. And here we are, the enemy, receiving better care than our own army could provide." The irony cuts deeper than any blade. These German soldiers had fought believing in the superiority of their system, their organization, their industrial might. Yet lying in clean American beds, receiving American medicine, eating American food prepared in American kitchens, the lie becomes impossible to maintain. Morrison returns with X-ray films, actual X-rays taken with equipment that would be miraculous in Wehrmacht field hospitals, where doctors diagnosed by touch and guesswork. "Bones not damaged," he announces, clipping the films to a light board. "Just soft tissue damage. You'll heal completely with proper treatment." Proper treatment. The phrase encapsulates everything wrong with Muller's understanding of this war. He thinks of his last letter from home, describing his mother's struggle to find medicine for his younger sister's pneumonia. The family had sold furniture to afford black market penicillin that might not even be real. Meanwhile, here in an Iowa prisoner camp, enemy soldiers receive authentic medicine administered without question or payment. "Doctor," Muller asks carefully, "how many prisoners do you treat here?" "In this ward?" "About 40 at any given time. The camp has 3 hospital buildings this size, plus specialized facilities for surgery and infectious diseases. We can handle maybe 200 patients when needed. 200 patients, receiving American-quality medical care, while German hospitals scrape together supplies for a dozen wounded at most. The revelation strikes like lightning. If America can afford such facilities for prisoners, what must their frontline medical support provide? What does this say about the industrial machine feeding their war effort? How can any army compete against an enemy whose weakness includes unlimited supplies of life-saving medicine. As evening approaches and nurses dim the lights, Mueller lies awake processing the collapse of everything he'd believed about American strength. The clean sheets feel alien against skin accustomed to rough Wehrmacht blankets. The warmth from proper heating systems contrasts with memories of freezing aid stations. The quiet efficiency of abundant medical care mocks every assumption about American disorganization. In the bed beside him, Kohler speaks into the darkness. We never had a chance, did we? They weren't just outproducing us in tanks and planes. They were outproducing us in everything. Bandages, medicine, hospital beds, hope itself. Mueller touches his shoulder, where the infection is already retreating under penicillin's assault. Tomorrow, he'll receive another injection. The day after, his wound will be cleaned and rebandaged with fresh supplies. In a week, he'll be healthier than he's been since before the war began. All courtesy of the enemy his leaders had taught him to despise. The darkness fills with the quiet sounds of healing, ventilators humming, IV drips measuring out medication, nurses moving softly between beds. It's the sound of a system that works, that has resources to spare, that treats even enemies with dignity. It's the sound of inevitable defeat. 6 months after the war's end, Mueller sits in the ruins of his family's bombed-out apartment in Munich, reading a letter from Alex Funke, the German chaplain who had served alongside him at Camp Algona. Funke's words carry the weight of transformed understanding. We all were positively impressed by the USA. We all had been won over to friendly relations with the USA, and that is the truth. The truth. Mueller sets down the letter and touches his shoulder, completely healed. No trace of the infection that would have killed him in any Wehrmacht hospital. Around him, Munich struggles with basic medical care. Hospitals operate without electricity. Doctors perform surgery with improvised tools, and penicillin remains as scarce as it had been during the war. Yet in Iowa, he had watched American nurses administer miracle drugs to German prisoners as casually as distributing bread. The psychological transformation that began in Camp Algona's hospital ward now spreads across defeated Germany. Returning prisoners carry stories that shatter remaining illusions about American weakness. They describe hospital beds stretching beyond sight, medicine cabinets that never emptied, doctors who had time to save teeth rather than just extract them. These stories become more powerful than any Allied propaganda campaign. In beer halls and family kitchens, former Wehrmacht soldiers described the abundance they witnessed as prisoners, abundance that revealed the true scope of American industrial might. If the enemy could afford such luxury for captives, the logic follows. What had their own soldiers been denied by comparison? Mueller's younger brother, invalided home from the Eastern Front with frostbite, listens to these accounts with growing bitterness. You received better medical care as a prisoner than I got fighting for the fatherland, he says, examining his permanently damaged fingers. They had penicillin for enemies, while our own wounded died from infections. This realization spreads through German society like the infections that American medicine had cured so effortlessly. The Reich's propaganda about superior organization and medical science crumbles against testimonies of American hospital abundance. Families begin to understand that their sons had fought not just a stronger enemy, but one whose strength included the compassion to heal rather than simply destroy. The strategic wisdom of American POW medical policy becomes clear in retrospect. By exceeding Geneva Convention requirements, by demonstrating abundance rather than scarcity, the United States had deployed what military historians would later call soft weapons, tools of persuasion more effective than artillery in undermining enemy morale. Every healed German prisoner became an unwitting ambassador for American values. Every story of abundant medical care planted seeds of doubt about Nazi claims of superiority. The hospitals at camps, like Algona, served as classrooms where captured enemies learned lessons about industrial capacity, organizational efficiency, and humanitarian values that no battlefield could teach. Muller's own transformation mirrors that of thousands of returning POWs who struggled to reconcile their treatment with pre-war propaganda. The cognitive dissonance proves overwhelming. How can a decadent society outproduce the Reich in everything from bandages to bedsheets? How can inferior organizational skills create medical systems that function flawlessly while German hospitals collapse under pressure? The answer reshapes post-war German understanding of American power. It wasn't just military superiority that won the war, but systematic superiority, the ability to maintain abundance while waging global conflict, to treat enemies humanely while crushing them industrially, to demonstrate strength through mercy rather than cruelty. Modern relevance emerges from these Iowa hospital wards. In an era of global conflict and competing ideologies, the Camp Algona model demonstrates how treating adversaries with dignity can serve strategic purposes beyond mere humanitarian obligation. The Germans who experienced American medical abundance became advocates for reconciliation, helping rebuild the very alliance that now anchors Western security. The ultimate irony persists. In trying to destroy American democracy, Nazi Germany inadvertently demonstrated its superiority. The Wehrmacht prisoners who expected brutality instead discovered a system so confident in its strength that it could afford generosity toward enemies. Their shock at American hospital abundance revealed not American weakness, but German miscalculation on an epic scale. Today, the Camp Algona Museum preserves testimonies of this transformation. Visitors read accounts of German prisoners stunned by endless supplies, clean facilities, and professional medical care that exceeded their homeland's capabilities. These stories remind us that true strength lies not in the ability to inflict suffering, but in the capacity to alleviate it, even for those who come as enemies. In those Iowa hospital beds, German prisoners learned that they had fought an enemy whose power encompassed not just military might, but moral authority. The lesson echoes across decades. Nations reveal their character not through how they treat friends, but through how they care for those who sought their destruction. What other soft weapons of compassion and abundance might reshape modern conflicts? Like and subscribe to explore more untold stories of how humanitarian values became strategic advantages in humanity's darkest hours.